Welcome to World Code Updates, your daily briefing on everything happening around the world. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more updates. August 2025, the city of Washington, D.C. awoke to a headline that would send shockwaves through the nation's capital and far beyond. As the sun rose over the Potomac, the city's power brokers, politicians, and everyday citizens alike were confronted with a story that would upend the very foundations of American governance. The Supreme Court of the United States had issued a landmark decision. SCOTUS strikes down presidential tariff authority. The news spread like wildfire, dominating every television screen, radio broadcast, and social media feed. Reporters rushed to the marble steps of the Supreme Court, eager to capture the reactions of lawmakers and legal experts as the implications of the ruling began to sink in. The announcement ricocheted through the halls of the Capitol and the offices of K Street, instantly dismantling a key pillar of presidential economic power that had stood for decades. Lobbyists, business leaders, and government officials scrambled to understand what this seismic shift would mean for their interests and for the country as a whole. For years, presidents from both parties had relied on the ability to impose tariffs under the guise of national security, wielding this authority as a powerful tool in international negotiations. Now, with a single ruling, the Supreme Court declared that power unconstitutional, stripping it from the executive branch and returning it squarely to Congress. The decision was hailed by some as a victory for checks and balances, while others warned it could paralyze America's ability to respond swiftly to global economic threats. The city was gripped by uncertainty. Stock markets swung wildly as investors tried to gauge the fallout. Business leaders, caught off guard, convened emergency meetings to assess how the sudden change in trade policy might impact their industries. The sense of instability was palpable, with many fearing that the loss of executive authority could lead to gridlock and economic turmoil. Inside the White House, the atmosphere was tense and urgent. An emergency meeting was called as soon as the news broke. The president, blindsided by the decision, demanded answers from advisors and legal counsel. With the administration's leverage in global negotiations suddenly evaporated, officials scrambled to devise a new strategy, aware that America's position on the world stage had been fundamentally altered overnight. The executive's once mighty trade authority had crumbled, replaced by a looming constitutional crisis that now pitted the presidency against both Congress and the judiciary. The balance of power in Washington was shifting in real time, with each branch of government preparing for a protracted battle over the future of American trade policy. As the day unfolded, Washington braced for a political storm unlike any in recent memory. Protests erupted outside government buildings, while pundits and politicians debated the ruling's consequences on every available platform. The city and the nation stood on the brink of a new era, uncertain of what would come next, but fully aware that history had just been made. The gavel falls, unraveling the Supreme Court's landmark decision. The case, American Importers Alliance vs. United States, challenged the president's use of Section 232 to impose sweeping tariffs under the guise of national security. In a 6-3 decision, the court ruled this interpretation unconstitutional, arguing that only Congress can regulate foreign commerce. The majority opinion restored a core legislative power, while dissenters warned the ruling would weaken America's global position. From now on, broad tariffs would require explicit congressional approval, ending an era of presidential trade unilateralism. A world reacts, from boardrooms to foreign capitals. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves worldwide. Foreign leaders, long frustrated by unpredictable U.S. tariffs, saw hope for stability. Markets rebounded as investors anticipated a return to rules-based trade. Global companies dusted off expansion plans. In Beijing, officials shifted their focus from the White House to the complexities of Congress, knowing influence would be harder to wield. Developing nations battered by trade wars hoped for a more predictable U.S. policy. Yet, the ruling didn't end trade friction, it simply changed the battleground. The world watched as America's domestic legal drama redrew the map of global commerce. The power shift. Congress reclaims the reins of trade. On Capitol Hill, the ruling jolted Congress into action. Lawmakers, long sidelined, now face the task of rewriting trade policy. A special bipartisan committee formed to review tariffs and chart a new legislative path. The debate was fierce. Some demanded immediate repeal of tariffs. Others urged caution to protect domestic industries. Lobbyists flooded Congress, each vying to shape the new rules. Trade policy shifted from swift executive orders to the slow grind of legislative compromise. the balance of power was reset. Future presidents would need Congress to act on trade. For American families and businesses, the ruling promised lower prices as tariffs faded, but also sparked anxiety in industries once shielded from foreign competition. Consumer groups cheered the prospect of relief at the checkout, while factory towns braced for renewed global rivalry. Small businesses split. Some celebrated cheaper materials, others feared being undercut. The decision exposed the contradictions of the U.S. economy. What helps one sector may hurt another. Millions of jobs now depended on Congress's next move. The debate over protectionism became personal, touching every household and workplace. The legal battle was over, but the economic consequences were just beginning. A nation divided, voices of triumph and fury. The ruling split the nation. Free trade advocates hailed it as a return to constitutional order, while tariff supporters saw betrayal. Editorials praised checks and balances. Talk radio decried judicial activism. For some, the decision meant hope for prosperity through global engagement. For others, it was a blow to American sovereignty. The debate became a culture war over national identity, not just economics. The Supreme Court had settled a legal question but ignited a political and cultural firestorm. The battle lines were drawn for a long, bitter fight. Trump's retort, a rallying cry against the establishment. Within an hour, former President Trump blasted the ruling as a betrayal, vowing to fight back and promising a rally to expose corrupt judges and weak politicians. His supporters erupted online, framing the decision as part of a deep state conspiracy. Protests were organized, and the ruling became a new rallying cry for the movement. At the rally, Trump pledged to reinstate tariffs if re-elected, directly challenging the constitutional order. Republican lawmakers faced a loyalty test: side with the court or with Trump. The issue of tariffs became a symbol of the nation's ongoing political struggle. The view from abroad, allies and adversaries weigh in. As the news broke, the world's attention turned sharply toward Washington, D.C. International newsrooms buzzed with analysis, and headlines flashed across screens from London to Tokyo, each offering their own interpretation of what this ruling meant for the global order. U.S. allies from Europe to Asia largely welcomed the ruling, seeing it as a potential step toward more predictable and stable trade relations. Many leaders expressed cautious optimism, hoping that a more balanced approach in Washington could reduce the uncertainty that had rattled global markets in recent years. Yet, behind closed doors, these same allies began quietly recalibrating their strategies. With power shifting from the White House to Congress, foreign governments realized they would need to build new relationships and find fresh ways to influence U.S. policy. The days of focusing on a single administration were over. Now, hundreds of lawmakers would shape America's stance on trade, security, and diplomacy. Embassies in Washington sprang into action, hiring new lobbyists and policy experts, and preparing for the complex challenge of persuading a diverse and often divided Congress. The diplomatic playbook was being rewritten in real time, as foreign officials sought to navigate the new landscape. Meanwhile, adversaries like Russia and China seized the moment to criticize the U.S., painting the decision as further evidence of American dysfunction and political gridlock. State media in Moscow and Beijing ran stories questioning the reliability of U.S. leadership on the world stage, yet behind their public statements, these governments saw both risk and opportunity. A divided U.S. government could mean less decisive action abroad, but it also opened doors for rivals to expand their influence in regions where American leadership might waver. For the World Trade Organization, the ruling was nothing short of a lifeline. After years of uncertainty, it was seen as an endorsement of rules-based trade and a chance for renewed U.S. engagement. WTO officials expressed hope that America would once again take a leading role in shaping fair and open global commerce. Around the globe, financial markets reacted with cautious optimism. Investors, business leaders, and ordinary citizens watched breaking news, wondering if this moment would mark a turning point for international cooperation and economic stability. The U.S. model of democracy was on full display. The world questioned, could America adapt to its new reality, or would internal divisions ultimately undermine its global leadership and credibility? As the sun set over Washington, world leaders, journalists, and citizens everywhere waited anxiously for America's next move, knowing that whatever happened next would ripple far beyond its borders. Democracy's test, the future of power and global standing. In this pivotal moment, the United States found itself at a crossroads where the very foundations of its democracy were being put to the test. The Supreme Court, long regarded as the guardian of constitutional principles, now stood at the center of a national reckoning. The Supreme Court's decision became a defining test of American democracy, reasserting the delicate balance of checks and balances that has guided the nation for centuries. Yet, this assertion of judicial authority did not come without consequence. It triggered a fierce backlash across the country, with citizens and leaders alike questioning the legitimacy and direction of the nation's highest court. Calls to defy the court's ruling echoed through the streets and the halls of power, challenging the very rule of law that underpins the American system. These calls raised urgent questions about the resilience and adaptability of U.S. institutions in the face of unprecedented division and dissent. Could the nation's framework withstand such pressure, or would it begin to fracture under the weight of its own ideals? On the world stage, America's global reputation hung in the balance. Allies and adversaries alike watched closely, wondering whether the United States would continue to serve as a beacon of democracy and stability, or if it would descend into internal conflict and uncertainty. The outcome of this moment would not only shape domestic affairs but also influence America's standing as a leader in the international community. Meanwhile, Congress faced the daunting task of forging a new trade consensus in a nation more polarized than ever before. Lawmakers grappled with competing visions for the country's future, debating fiercely over policies that would impact generations to come. The challenge was not just legislative but existential: how to unite a divided people and chart a path forward in uncertain times. Across the nation, the American people were left to decide what kind of country they wanted to be. Would they uphold constitutional principles and embrace global engagement, or turn inward toward insular nationalism? The choices made in living rooms, town halls, and polling places would reverberate far beyond the nation's borders. The Supreme Court's ruling did not end the debate, it merely reframed it, posing a profound question that would define the nation's future. Could America rise to meet the challenges of its time, or would it falter in the face of division? The answer, as always, would be written by the people themselves.